Shalom. So we are starting early because we can. I am here with a Brant who has a channel, Coroneus Phocis. I put a link in the description. And the reason I contacted him, somebody on Bridges of Meaning linked his series, which I found to be really interesting, partially because I could see what I think is a brilliant mind, basically reinventing the wheel because he needs to, and that's why I wanted to include Brant in our little corner of the internet, into our distributed cognition in our cognitive network, and get so. Introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you think, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to live up to that brilliance adjective.
No, you're brilliant. You're brilliant. You are one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, and I don't just throw that around. And I've met a lot of brilliant people.
Well, I appreciate it, Jacob, but sometimes I'm not sure if I believe that internally. So I'm Brent. My background, I started a channel called Coroneus Phocis. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Okay, I started a channel called Coroneus Phocis, and the reason is that I was basically binge watching Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson lectures for a long time, year and a half or so. And some of the things that I had been noticing from my own background, which I got an undergrad in physics. I have 2 master's degree, an MBA and an MSBA. And in my career before I became an entrepreneur, I was a data science manager and kind of still am as a consultant for a company. So I've done a lot of work with perception and kind of optimization systems and algorithmic math, basically. And the key point that really opened my eyes, and I'll credit Peterson for this specifically, was his view of life as an optimization system. And he has a very elegant, description of the male hierarchy and its evolutionary function and how it develops in this optimization sort of pattern. And that led to a series of epiphanies for me. And one of the things that came out of it was that cooperation of a species, individuals of a species, is linked to their fitness score individually and inclusively. And so when you do some research in the evolutionary fields, you see that there's, I would say it's not a perfect model, but a model that has an inclusive fitness score and a personal fitness score, and then those 2 fitness scores add to a total fitness score. And that's the inclusive fitness score. Everyone's kind of familiar with the personal, it's your direct lineage and replication down line. But the inclusive fitness score is a really interesting concept, and it's what allows for things like altruism to load, right? Because any of those costs outside of your line really don't fit within an evolutionary theory. But as soon as you include the idea of inclusive fitness, all of these concepts where the hierarchy can manage across time become a thing, because you have to manage a group now, not just a line of individuals. So with that, I guess the primary thing that I saw was that there's a link between sexual repression and specific reproductive suppression of individuals in a group and their cooperation. Because if you suppress their individual personal fitness scores, they have to still maximize total fitness, and the only way to do that is by focusing on inclusive fitness, which is helping other people to reproduce, right? Helping build a community, so to speak. And the degree to which you subject to reproductive suppression the population is highly correlated with the degree of cooperation, so much so that the extreme is ants and bees and other eusocial species, where only one thing reproduces and all the other individuals are perfectly suppressed, or in theory perfectly suppressed. So
well, I'm a little skeptical as to how the causation, like what causes what.
Yeah.
And I don't know that necessarily. I mean, so the practice of castration still
Yeah.
goes on in India. There are some at least 500,000, I believe what they call them is hijra castrati
Mm-hmm.
there, and it's a very gruesome castration that I was shocked to learn still goes on in modern day, but it does.
Sure.
And the weird thing is I don't like the hijra are kind of outcasts in India. But
Oh yeah.
this wasn't where I was.
No, 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 no.
Yeah,
It's a
I
valid
was
point. I think
going.
what I would say is that everyone's mind when you talk about like reproductive suppression jumps to the most extreme example. But I mean, just thinking in wolf packs and lion prides, right? Like there's reproductive suppression in very small degrees there as well. Especially wolves are a great example of that. Meerkats do the same thing, and if you get to in the mammalian species, the best example is the eusocial naked mole rat. They actually have a queen and one, two, three, roughly, males that are breeders, and then the rest of the males and females are all sterile, and they engage in sexual behavior and mount each other, etc. But it's all just to maintain cooperation, and they have roles, and they developed quite a society. They're an interesting species beyond that as well, but the point is the pattern holds, and it's that the reproductive suppression is required for cooperation. And it's just the selfish component. You can't have cooperation and selfishness at the same time, right?
Well,
It's not stable.
Let me shift the level of analysis a little bit because
Sure.
so my thing is I think like this is, for example, this topic is a very interesting thing to delve into. But obviously, neither one of us is a full-time sociologist or
Nope.
anthropologist or even biologist, right?
Correct.
And what I've noticed, for example, Brett Weinstein, who is a qualified biologist, has been able to walk into things which supposedly have been studied for hundreds of not if not thousands of years, like political systems, social systems, and to point out things that he has very little speciality. I guess
Yeah.
he hasn't spent his whole life studying these things, and I actually like when I went to college. That's why I studied political science. I didn't finish, but I did the coursework for my master's of public administration and law degree. And so what I have found is that those of us who are supposedly on the inside of, when I was on the inside of academia, but the academics who are supposedly the smartest people who should be talking about a lot of this stuff, they tend to not even be able to acknowledge things that an individual who as a part-time, like almost on a hobby basis, looks can obviously see. And for me, that is an indication of something incredibly wrong with that. I call them social sense making mechanisms. I don't, I guess you could call them institutions, but when we talk about, for example, the all the problems with, we can talk about all the problems with the birth control pill, like your series, which I highly recommend, does. But for me, it leads to a bigger question of, okay, why is some random guy making videos with, I don't know how many thousand viewers you have, not, I mean, why are you the one who's, from data readily available, making these observations which are so obvious that from the outside you can do it, whereas the American Medical Association, the Federal Drug Administration, all the people who are the school, all the university schools of public health, right? Why is this video coming from an individual YouTuber as opposed to the Harvard School of Public Health?
That's a great question. I would say that look, I am not a conspiracy person at all, like in any way, shape, or form. But I do believe in shared delusion, right, and intentional blindness by groups. And one of the, I guess it's a really old saying, is that you can only perceive that which you're ready to perceive. So, in order to see the effects of like the hormonal contraceptive, or where I was going with humans, reproductive suppression initially was just monogamous marriage, right? The social institution of marriage. You have to step back from the individual perspective and kind of look at us as though we're a collective unit. And then when you see us from that perspective, the pros and cons, because each solution behavioral pattern has both pros and cons to it, become apparent. And I think that the idea, and this is I don't know why no one else, I've not heard anyone else say this, but the idea that our invention of a supply chain distributed hormonal contraceptive that reproductively suppresses the breeding age females of our population is an evolutionary leap akin to ants, bees, and naked mole rats doing the same thing with organs. I don't know why no one else has made that connection, and I don't know. I don't know.
Well, okay. So I'm going to get far more conspiratorial than you're willing to.
Sure.
So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said you have to start looking at things more from, a different vantage, a more collectivist vantage point. But that makes me even more suspicious of the fact that supposedly the people who are the most collectivist, the people who are actually Marxists, and the people who we are supposedly criticizing are at the same time the most blind to some of these very, very, I wouldn't say it's obvious, because I don't think it's obvious, but I think when we have smart people like you actually looking into things, it's obvious enough that I do not believe it's incompetence or negligence which leads our schools of public health, the American Medical Association, the government regulators. I think we excuse a lot of things with negligence that if they are actually that negligent, right? If the people running all of these institutions are actually that negligent, then
yeah, but so I agree with you in principle that there's maybe some negligence or willful blindness, we'll say, right? Profits are high among pharmaceutical companies that's distributing drugs and, chemically temporarily sterilizing our females. Sure, but what I will say, though, is that our society hasn't really come to terms. We think of ourselves outside of other life-based systems. And we continually do that, which is fair enough because we are the thing that we're studying, so we probably should do that. But questions like what is a male, and I'm not making this political because I know the what is a woman thing is going on. I don't mean it that way. Just a genuine question of like what is a male and what is the purpose of males from a life perspective. No one asked that, and no one's really gone into to depth to break it down and deconstruct what a male versus a female is, and that there has to be a purpose behind those categorizations for it to exist from a purely evolutionary optimization lens. Because when you walk up from single-celled organisms, the leap from asexual, multiplying bacteria, if you're in the fitness function context of maximize reproduction, the leap to split half of your reproductive effort off to males is a huge leap to make. And there's a lot of theories out there about why that's happened, but nobody's really posed the question in a public space to really recenter ourselves.
I could not disagree more.
Really?
Again, I think you are reinventing the wheel, and my proof is all of. So at USC, where I went, we had a department of for the study of women and men in society, not a gender studies department, because whereas many places have gender studies, women's studies, I actually think this is something that has been studied very, very much in depth.
In academia, yes.
In academia, well, where else? I mean, that's where our that's where our institutions of sense making primarily reside.
I don't think the evolutionary psychologists or any of the biologists are confused about what a male is and its purpose. When I mean public space, I mean the political discourse. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm talking to probably pre-2016, right?
So I have not read Red Queen, but yeah.
Yeah, the Red Queen hypothesis. Oh, great comment. So the Red Queen hypothesis is a great example, and I kind of went into that as one of the primary factors that allows for sexual reproduction to be a better optimization mechanism than asexual. And specifically, it relates to the idea that it's complicated, but being able to mutate faster without impacting reproductive capability of your main set of reproductive units is important. The issue becomes that most mutations that happen in an evolutionary respect are detrimental. So because of that, if you increase mutation rate and you're doing it on, let's say, the asexual bulk of your species, you get to a point where you lose benefits from higher mutation rates because too many of your offspring are non-reproductive, right? Are incapable of future reproductive. But if you subsect a portion of your population, call them male, and they're not reproductively necessary in great numbers to continue the next generation, you've created a test bed that you can mutate faster, and then also allowed yourself to select off positive variants back into what we'll call the female core of the species.
Right.
And that's where you can get really fast optimization. If you look at the history of life, the diversity of species over time, you can see where sexual selection evolved because the diversity of species just blew up in the great tree of life, which is an awesome thing to behold.
So again, though, why am I talking to a physicist with an MBA and part-time entrepreneur telling me what I think is and here I am, an insurance agent, right?
Sure.
And we're talking about things that are important. I mean, I completely agree with you that you have hit upon one important thing.
Sure.
I could point, I think, to at least 10 to 20 other similar things. And it's like, what's wrong with our sense making? Why is an insurance agent talking to I don't even know what I would call you, but I certainly wouldn't call you a social theorist. And,
probably most accurately described as a data scientist and general nerd. That's probably the best.
So why are the general nerds like this is beyond incompetence? I keep on.
Well, but yeah. So Jacob, I look. My personal views on where we're headed and what's going on is that we're actually moving through a really difficult filtering event in our species evolutionary path, and that's why it feels like we've lost our sense, because there's actually two competing, we'll say, massive archetypal behavioral patterns competing for the future currently. And you have where we sit, I have a family, and you being, from a religious background, we're both focused on, we'll say, the old behavioral pattern that's based around monogamy as the primary, we'll say, nodal interconnection of society, and that from that family group arises the rest of community, and that, reproductive success at the family unit is important and really paramount to success of society, because you have to continue to pass the culture on down those lines. And you would call that a conservative position, and I think it manifests politically as conservatives, although I don't think they've connected it directly to every position they have, but most of their positions politically connect directly back to maintaining that family unit and cultural progression down line. The alternative behavioral pattern that may actually work, it may not, I personally don't believe in it, but being objective, is one in which you convert the family unit into a collective, reproductively suppressed worker group. And then it begs the question is, well, how do you reproduce? And right now, they're filling the gap with immigration from areas that I would call still reproductively, positive. Mm-hmm. But long term, they're going to have to do something centralized. So either there becomes, and again, I'm projecting out here, but just drawing analogies from other life forms and how they've, let's say, completed this transition. You have to centralize reproduction, and either that'll be done technologically or it'll be done in a caste-based system. But it is no doubt that there is a portion of our population who has decided that the proper role in life is to forego personal reproduction and dedicate your entire life in service to productive utility in society. And it is a brand new paradigm. And because it's such a new paradigm, you can't really have a conversation across it, because the goal and aim isn't even the same fundamentally.
I'm wondering, first of all, if it is a new paradigm, because, again, I mean, we
for females, it definitely is. It's new for females.
We've had nuns.
We have, but they've been always a small subsect, right? And they have been dedicated, and that's a valid point. But we're not talking about the mass 80+% of a population.
Well, I don't see. I mean, we haven't gotten to the technological. I understand, mm-hmm. And I think through human history there has been suppression of male. I mean, and the genetic evidence is clear that half of all males never reproduce. Right?
So that's not the reproductive suppression I'm talking about. That's actually default male mm-hmm. hierarchy right. functioning as intended. Right. The reproductive suppression I'm talking about is actually what's invoked through marriage, monogamous, societal enforced monogamy, basically, where it reproductively suppresses the females of our population by not allowing them to pick the best genetic material from the male hierarchy. They're forced right. to pair basically across, not across and up, and it reinvests the bottom 80% of the male hierarchy back into society. And that's right. where the cooperation comes from, is the reproductive suppression of the females actually allows for more cooperation in the male hierarchy because it's less competitive.
And so that's what I see actually in some ways is being flipped.
It is. Yeah, no, so hypergamy and polygamy are coming back. Absolutely they are. And they naturally will, because monogamy is no longer considered important. So rather than reinvest males back into society through Andromeda on the rock, so to speak, right? The idea that you can gain reproductive access. The reinvestment of males is more of a satiation via way of porn, prostitution, and then banal entertainment, just to satiate their base drives. And it seems to be, again, does it work? It seems to work. The question is,
I don't see. I don't see it working at all.
Well, in the short term, it has a GDP boost. So that's the problem, is that monetarily, as soon as you do reproductive suppression on the females and you invest them as a worker class into the society, you get a big boost in GDP. And then everyone's standard of living comes up and everyone thinks, hey, this is great, grand, and glorious. The problem is it long-term sustainable? And the reproductive rates across all of the West and East Asia would indicate that it's not, without some other additional technological improvement or something shifting. So my personal opinion, although I try to be objective on that side's potential, is that I don't want to live in that world, and I would much rather we go back to a little less cooperation, maybe, and a little less let's say productivity in the economic sector, and more family focus, specifically from the females amongst us, and go back to reproduction as the primary goal, right? One of the things I think that the feminists as a group miss is that men's focus on economic success at its core is really a focus on reproduction access. So the idea that women should turn away from reproductive success for economic success is kind of bizarre from a life perspective. That's really not what you'd want.
Well, yeah, when people ask me what's the one thing I disagree the most with Jordan Peterson about, is he talks about a lack of masculinity, and I think actually the problem is a lack of femininity. And I think I
agree with you.
Viewing GDP as a number we need to maximize. I mean, we could get into economics, and I would, but this idea of the price theory of value, which is the value of everything is what it goes for on the open market, right? That's just ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous on its face, because there's no amount of money that would make most parents sell their children.
Nope.
Although it has happened, and it does sometimes happen. But yeah.
Well, Jacob, you're also missing a component, though, is that we as a society have taken 14-year-old girls and had them ingest extremely powerful hormones that actually stop their natural perception of value in not only the male hierarchy, but in life in general. So, when you're stuck with, women have historically been paired with the moon because their primary path through life and adulthood is a cyclical pattern around the menstrual cycle, right? And it affects everything about how they perceive not only men, but the world in general. And it's just the basis of what they are. It's so much of their emotional state and their perception is built into that monthly cycle. And as soon as you suppress that hormonal pattern, there's a reason it developed the way it developed. It's optimized for something. And we're...
How dare you speak things that are obviously true?
The hubris, right? The hubris. Like, I am a religious person, but I'm obviously very invested in science. Science and God are the same thing to me, right? That science should be able to explain God if you keep going down the path, right? So you look at 4.5 billion years of optimization of these self-replicating proteins, and we're going to come along and change the hormonal mix of the most influential subsect of our population. Breeding age females from 14 to about 30 are it. They dictate male behavior. So when somebody says that lack of masculinity is the problem, you're missing the fact that the masculine hierarchy will respond to female preference immediately all the time. So the issue isn't the male hierarchy. It does not dictate sexual selection. The female hierarchy does. And it only functions properly when the perception of the individual nodes in that hierarchy are tuned correctly, as was done with evolution. So when you distort 14 to 30-year-old females' view of what the proper male should be by changing their hormonal balance, and studies show that women on birth control prefer feminized men, the idea that the male hierarchy would lose its masculine nature and convert to a more feminized hierarchy, it's a duh, of course. Why wouldn't they? Their sole goal, the entire goal of the hierarchy, is to maximize access to reproduction. If the females are choosing more feminization in their males, the top of the hierarchy is going to be feminized. That's the way it is.
I'm absolutely outraged that you would say things which are obviously true.
Sorry, man.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and they're so obviously true. And I mean, what do we do about our society where we're sitting around talking about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I mean, we're talking about the dumbest things. Um, Although, I mean, to some extent, we have to realize people don't like when I say this obvious truth, which is, I'm sorry, if you have below a 100 IQ, which is 50% of the general population,
Mm-hmm.
you have no capacity to engage in this discussion we're having. You simply do not have a capacity to engage the discussion that the two of us are having right now if your IQ is below 100. I'm sorry, you just it is similar to putting a child on an NFL football pitch.
See, Jacob, I don't know if I agree with you. So, and here's what I'll say about that. I would say that the danger of our, we'll say, I'll use your term, distributed cognition, right, and our social sense making, to use your words, doesn't come from the sub 100 IQs being involved in a debate. It comes from the 115 to the 135s who are assured of their own intellectual superiority, assuming that they know truth.
The midwits.
That's sure. I've heard that term before. That's the danger zone because they know enough to think that it's the oh man, what's the name of that curve?
Dunning-Kruger or no?
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Thank you. Dunning-Kruger. Yeah, the idea that you know enough to trust the experts, so to speak, but you don't know enough to actually engage in real in-depth conversation. What's interesting is these concepts that you call common sense that people, are supposed to just kind of know. When you talk to people that we'll say aren't as intellectually sophisticated, they get it. And they just agree. They're like, yeah, sounds right. And it's like, duh, that's what marriage is for. Duh, I'm a man. That's kind of the responses that I get. It's the people who are the supposed intellectuals among us who scoff and look down their nose at these ideas. And that's where I feel like our social sense making is wrong. It's more hubris based. People, as much as I used to binge watch Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins and those kind of guys, it's them that are the problem. So.
Ooh, I mean Dawkins. See,
he casts off. This is my problem with Dawkins, and it's solely one thing because he gets almost everything that I've talked about. The one leap that he hasn't made is to what you just said, and it's that this level of understanding where you can kind of moralize a Sam Harris style of moralization via intellectual, process is not accessible for the bulk of society. And so you have to instantiate proper moral behavior in some sort of codified group that imprints the proper behavioral pattern on your constituent elements. And that's what religion is. That's what it is. And so to cast religion off as this superstitious nonsense that attempts to, like the Neil deGrasse Tysons of the world, that they basically cast religion as this superstition that attempts to explain the physical universe. You're not thinking of it in the right context. It's a behavioral evolutionary adaptation. That's why it's universal across all humans. And
but is the problem there? I mean, Dawkins obviously has innovated enough scientifically that he is a valuable node in our distributed cognition, and I would never consider him a midwit.
No,
I think the problem is that in those places that he does outsource his cognition, what I think the problem is that our distributed cognition is being hacked, and the people like Dawkins in those areas where he first of all, he's allowed to speak outside of his lane, and I'm not a big fan of stay in your lane, but he is given authority outside of his lane that when he does speak, it's obvious he has. I mean, the guy knows almost. um, I forget what the exact same thing, what the exact quote was, but a new atheist would flunk first like a theology 101 class.
Oh yeah. Well, no. So, but see, this is the problem, right? So, to your point on Dawkins specifically, he'll say, what book was it? It was The Selfish Gene. He wrote a passage that took Aquinas to task, I want to say. And in that passage, he basically tried to, in the Summa Theologica, Thomas Aquinas lays out quite elegantly a lot of proofs for God, right? And Dawkins did basically a hand wave and called it circular reasoning and didn't even address half of the logic while being, quote unquote, respectful of Saint Aquinas. So it's that level of, it's not Dawkins himself, it's that level of dismissiveness of what came before that I find to be disconcerting. And really, it's the attacks on the religious institutions, because that's not where the danger is coming from. Hierarchies, as Peterson's pointed out many, many times, hierarchies tend towards corruption, and there's corruption across all religious organizations, but that's not a reason to destroy the entire substructure of our species' behavioral patterns that's codified in for the West, the Judeo-Christian traditions, and in the East, you would say it's either in the Buddhist or in the
Confucius.
Yeah, right.
So what's the solution?
Well, again, I think the solution. So the solution is this. I don't know. That's the solution, and no one can know. I think that the right answer is that my personal belief is that there are two paths in front of us, and we have a divergent evolutionary event happening for us right now, and I see many problems with the path that is just the destruction of family specifically, and the focus on more communal reproductive activity. I see a lot of problems there, namely the gestation period for human females and the litter size does not really correlate well with centralizing reproduction in a smaller and smaller group.
Well,
you
okay.
have lower and lower fertility.
When I contacted you, I deliberately said I don't want to engage, and I don't want to engage. I disagree with you on a lot of things.
Sure.
But
that's great.
I think similar to you, I also look at the world and I say, I don't know. Like I see problems and I don't know. And that's why my project has become secured cognition, because I want people like you, Sam Adams, Yosef, John Vervaeke, the people who are far smarter than I am, to actually engage, and hopefully I would be able to contribute in some way to, because the problem is bigger than, and we actually kind of talked about this before we started, but so cognitive science, the field has has been an attempt to teach a computer to do that which human beings do, and I think has allowed us to better understand and model our own ourselves, right? And so I think there's a level of just data processing that can be done in a distributed computer network that no human being, and every time somebody says think for yourself, I think that's just idiotic. The idea that we have the input then computation, then output capacity to actually process all of human knowledge. It's just ridiculous. I can never read even,
Yeah.
and then to process it and then to output it. And so for me, the project has become to develop the type of network which can actually engage in these conversations intelligently and actually do some of the processing.
No, it's completely a valid take.
One of the biggest problems, however, is that we get bad actors. As soon as I see one of these networks developing, and I was not surprised to find Claire Kaw had contacted you, because
she's interesting.
I follow her simply to find people like you who are making a ton of sense, and I am convinced that her life project is, if she's an actual individual, is to in fact confound people like you, and stop us from having the distributed cognition we can have.
So, I mean, I think you'll always have bad actors. I'm not really sure what you're going to do about that. The one of the risks of that, first off, the idea of a secure distributed network is a great idea, and the only issue comes up when you try to police the network, because then it's a hard line, right? It's like the reason we're trying to create a distributed network is because the machine at large is censoring conversation or potentially infiltrating it with a whole bunch of other stuff. And so really focusing on truthful communication, I think, is the answer. I think you hit the nail on the head, Jacob. I do. Getting enough individuals to truthfully talk about these issues is the only way, because there's no way any one individual can perceive the whole. It's not possible. It's like a neuron trying to perceive one of your neurons trying to perceive you. It's not possible, right? We're going to need a group effort here to really make sense of the way forward. I said, I'm not worried about Claire. She reached out. I think there's always going to be Claires among us. Engage with them. The biggest thing is people need to not throw people out for little things like having an interview with someone like Claire, right? Really focus on what people are saying.
Well, I would never. I haven't even thrown Claire out, which I've certainly considered.
Yeah,
right? She still shows up, and I have limited her on my server. She's only allowed in one channel. She's not allowed in the other channels.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I want to know. I want to talk to people like you who can think about this intelligently. I'm having conversations, and the one technology. Well, okay, I've been doing two things which I think increase the quality of the conversations. One, as much as possible, I have been getting rid of anonymity. My name is Jacob Federecci, and if you Google my name, you will find both the address to my thing and my email address and my phone number.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, the only reason I don't actually just say my phone number is if you're that dumb that you can't find it, I would rather not have to deal with it.
That's fair enough.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and to your point, when I first started the channel, I did it under a pseudonym, right? Because I was concerned that my ability to feed my 5 daughters and my wife and my career would be at risk, just because I had an idea and wanted to put it out there in the ether. So
well, if you want to project your genes into the future, 5 daughters is pretty good, except for the Y chromosome. I think your Y chromosome might be a tiny bit unhappy about that. But,
yeah, it will, and there's no more coming. So it's
really?
had its chance,
sure?
and it's over. Yeah,
Okay.
we're done. It's we're both in our late 30s, early 40s now, so it's we're done. We've done the parent thing. I got daughters from 14 to 2 in age range. So we did our part. I would encourage everyone to do theirs. I'm doing my part, the old Starship Troopers thing.
You sound like Elon Musk.
Well, it's funny because he sees it too. The population crisis is coming, and it's a result of this mishmash of reproductive strategies.
Did you see the Rolling Stone? Article? I have to pull this up now because it was just so ridiculous.
Jacob, I think it was in Elon Musk and Rogan's interview. They said something profound, is that we may be living in the time period with the most humans on the planet that will ever be. And that is a scary thought if you think about the implications of that. That it's all downhill from here.
I mean, it is if... I'm trying to find... Well, yeah, I mean, I think... the people who say we have to get off this rock are definitely right. I found this article. Let me put it on screen so you can see it. And so,
what a headline.
Elon Musk is trying to justify his breeder kink and failing. Right? Now, this is Rolling Stone magazine, right?
Jeez.
And the idea that if you had told me Rolling Stone magazine would be making fun of any kink, right? I would be like, kink shaming? Are you joking? But the supposed kink is breeding. That's now a paraphilia, right? That's
the implication is striking, right? That the primary function of the act is now a kink. It's something not associated with it at all.
And he has to justify his breeder kink. And of course he's failing, because how could you possibly justify a kink like breeding?
I mean, Jacob, I'm beating a dead horse here probably, but I mean, like I said, naked mole rats engage in sterile mounting that placates their sexual drives. It's not focused on reproduction. So from their perspective, reproduction is not the primary purpose of sexual activity. It just is. Like, it's bizarre to us, because if you know anything about life, it's like, well, that's the reason it exists. If you know
anything about science, this was another thing. Like last night I was walking down the street with my dad, and somebody had a sign, "Science is real," right, along with all the Black Lives Matter stuff. And it's like, the people who are claiming most vociferously science is real are the same people who are breeding kink.
That's funny. The irony is rough. It's rough to take.
Well, so this is another thing I keep on saying. If you do the opposite, like if you're taking a math test and you're sitting next to the kid who doesn't know any of the answers, right? Who's definitely going to fail. Mm-hmm. You cannot get an A by taking his answers and just doing the opposite, right? With these people, it's like, it's not just that it's wrong, it's the opposite of right.
Yeah. But again, I'm just keep going back. They don't see it that way. Their base assumption set's different than ours.
I cannot believe people are this negligent. I do not believe it's negligence.
It's not negligence, Jacob. What I'm trying to say is, like, I can construct an entire mathematics framework that has a different 12 axioms, right? And if I remove the axiom, if I say there exists no zero set, I can instruct logically coherent mathematical framework from that'll be wildly different than our current, accepted mathematical framework that has the zero set in it. And the reason that happens is that they're being logically consistent inside of their own framework for the most part. I don't want to give them too much credit because there's a lot of logical inconsistency even inside of it. But their assumption set that the fundamental unit of life is male-female coupled, right? What was it? Ish and Isha, I want to say in the Hebrew, right? I'm getting there. I'm trying. I'm spinning up, right? That those two together were in Adam originally, right? That's the fundamental unit of man. They don't have that. They don't see us that way. They've changed the fundamental unit to some sort of androgenized hero, and it's an androgynous Gilgamesh or an androgynous Saint George. That's the fundamental unit of society, and there is no pairing to one. So because there's no pairing to one, sex becomes a recreational activity because the reproduction that's inherent in that pairing doesn't matter. That's their assumption set's different, so they don't see the world the same way.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I think, again, I think you're giving them too much credit because I think you wouldn't end up with the opposite of
no, I mean, okay. I don't want to defend this article. Like, don't put me in a position to. I'm with you. This is it's absurd.
Well, no. But it's not just a bad article. It's the opposite. Like, breeder kink.
I know, man. I get it. Like, I see it. Look, I guess my primary purpose in making my channel was that I saw, I had 5 daughters, and when I started the channel, none of them hit puberty yet. And I saw it coming, and I saw that the majority of their peer groups, especially right around puberty, it was just a norm that as soon as their puberty started, they would get acne, and they'd go to the doctor, and the doctor would, here's some pills, and it'll clear up your acne, it'll stabilize your cycle, and you don't have to worry about getting pregnant. And then they live their lives in the early phases while their brain's still developing and their behavioral patterns are still, codifying themselves, and they're choosing their future mates, an important point that's going to lead to the rest of their lives. Right. They're in this hormonally confused fog. And so I started the channel with the primary purpose of talking to people in that fog that don't agree with how I view the world. So I really want to try to understand how they view the world so that I can communicate with them as best as possible. And a lot of times it doesn't work,
I think you're operating at the wrong level of analysis. I think that's the problem. I think you are operating at the wrong level of analysis, because I think the stuff that you're saying is obvious enough that, again, like I said, I think you reinvented the wheel, and somebody smart enough to reinvent the wheel. Yes, there were civilizations without the wheel, and it sucked for them.
Yeah.
What
do you mean that I reinvented the wheel? I think I know what you're talking about, but specifically portion?
I think what you're advancing, right? The problem of reproduction and the problem of the pill and all of these stuff that you're talking about, I think it's one small part of things that we in fact have known for a very long time.
Yep. The Catholic Church knew about it for sure. They had a scathing document they published on hormonal contraceptive back when it was first being introduced in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody paid
So,
attention to it, though.
see,
Well,
the Catholic Church has 1 billion members.
oh,
It is
sure, okay,
one
fair enough.
eighth of the human population.
And it was influential enough that the Catholic birth rate's still high, right? So
Right.
I don't want to say it had no impact, but there are segments of the population who are very vocal, who aren't swayed by those kinds of arguments.
I think this is because especially in the United States, our distributed cognitive network, we do have a distributed cognitive network. The New York Times is a part of it, and the New York Times is putting out the opposite. Like, they're not just putting out junk; they are actually creating noise within the signal that exists. And
yeah. But why do you think they're doing that? So what's your that's what I'm missing. I'm trying
spoken to you about Edward Bernays yet?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Century of the Self and old Father Bernays, we'll call him.
I actually think the Century of the Self is actually the Edward Bernays' tools being used against him, because
fair enough, I can see that.
As far as I'm concerned, I see Bernays as a similar figure to the physicists who helped create the nuclear bomb.
Yeah,
I
agree. I don't think Bernays should be vilified.
Yeah,
I don't think that.
I think he developed new psychotechnologies, which he naively thought, if I distribute them to the rest of the world, everybody will know, and human society will be much better off. And that these psychotechnologies are being used to hack our distributed cognition, which actually brings me back to what I was saying, the two things: anonymity, and the other one is, when having conversations, I have started insisting on having conversations with video. Sure. Because I think that completely changes how we communicate and our ability to actually seriously engage with ideas.
No,
and so
big portion of communication is nonverbal, so you want to be able to see someone in their reaction, facial expressions, etc.
And I think it helps keep out the dishonest people.
Sure.
Even Claire. Well, with her, I insist on also using the mute button, because she will gish gallop you. But yeah, I come back to my project of distributed cognition, of more honest conversations with smart people about things that, well, I have to say, at some point we have to say somebody like Noam Chomsky or Richard Dawkins or anybody else who, as smart as they may be, when they start saying stupid things outside their lane, at some point we have to say, you know what, you're a graphics processor.
Sure. Well, I mean, honest rebuttals, like, the cult of personality shouldn't be used, right? Everyone is wrong. The majority of their life is wrong. They have, tidbits of slightly more accurate than the next evolved monkey, so to speak, right? That you want to glean out of everyone. But, I would say that, again, and my disparaging of Dawkins wasn't intended to say he has no value. He has great value. That's not the point. The point is that there are aspects of, there's a closed-mindedness to certain things that we probably don't want to have as a group. We want to, if there's a logical argument being made, it should be taken seriously, so.
And the converse of that, I actually was having this discussion on Bridges of Meaning right before you showed up, was if people say ridiculous things, we have to start calling out the ridiculousness.
Yeah.
And actually, this might be an interesting segue, but that's been part of my whole crusade against the Trinity. is I really, and I keep on saying 1 equals 3 inevitably leads to 2 plus 2 equals 5, by which I mean the Trinity inevitably leads to critical race theory, because when you are not willing to say, you know what, no, this is just ridiculous, you end up with an environment in which critical race theory and other things which should be patently obviously wrong are not confronted.
Yeah. Well, so I'll agree with you. I'm not a personal believer in the Trinity, although, to play devil's advocate, I do see some benefits of that notion. I also see benefits from the other notion, right? The standard Christian notion, we'll say the non-Catholicized Trinitarian notion, in which Jesus is just the Son of God, right? Not so much God Himself, but there is some power in the equation of the attributes that you would call the Holy Spirit, Christ as a figure, and the Father as being equally important. So there are drawbacks because, as you say, it adds to complexity of understanding, and there's no paramount set of traits at the top of the hierarchy, so to speak. But
well, I actually think the problem is the lack of ineffability. I think at the whatever the top of the hierarchy has to be ineffable. The analogy I make is to arithmetic, calculus, algebra, and calculus. You can't do arithmetic with variables, right? X plus y equals x plus y, right? Yep. Whereas 2 plus 3 equals 5. Yep. But once you start doing algebra and calculus, you have to have that undefined character to it, and that's where I would say the Trinity falls into idolatry. Yes, to quote Trinitarians, Judaism has always believed in a multi-personal God, right? That God manifests Himself in concrete ways in the world, right? But the confusion of a person of God with the ineffable God Himself, I think it reduces the variable to a constant.
You're not going to find direct disagreement from me because my personal beliefs align with yours in this. Although I still am a Christian, so I have an interesting...
A lot of people would disagree.
Sure, right. No, to your analogy of the mathematics of it, without Elijah, you don't get to Christ. So there's a continuing, we'll say, better elaboration of the set of things that you see from the Old Testament and prophecies to the New. And when I say I'm a Christian, I would say primarily, the 4 Gospels and Acts. There are wisdoms in there that I don't find. What
do you think of Revelation?
So I read it. There's symbolism in there that's interesting. I wouldn't say I'm a biblical literalist when it comes to that sort to any of it. I would say, with the exception of probably the book of John, the Gospel of John.
Okay.
That there's something in that one. It's there's wisdom in that in those writings that doesn't exist anywhere else in the entire text, and I don't know where and it's right in the beginning too. I don't know where they came up with it. I don't have an answer other than it's of God.
Philo of Alexandria.
That's what they say, but the first part of John I don't think is contained there.
Yeah, no. That's pretty much everybody agrees. Well, is it contained in Philo of Alexandria?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've heard my supposed. I didn't call it this. Sam called it this, but my theory of a Kabbalistic lab leak, which is that
Sure.
Neoplatonism and all all of this, all of the great stuff in John is actually things that leaked out of the Jewish community.
Oh yeah. So, but my point is not. So you're making an argument that it's not scripture because scripture is something separate from a compilation of group thought that's generated, right? And I'm not really making an argument for John's
Well,
origins physically.
Do you
I mean, the
believe
ideas
in an
contained in John.
agentic God who reveals truths which are not which have their source in God and not the human beings who understand them? I'm asking if you believe in actual revelation.
Yes, I believe.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm going to answer yes to almost every one of these questions that you have, but the yes may be qualified in a different
So
understanding.
So explain to me what you mean.
So yeah, I love the phrase that people don't have ideas; ideas have people, right?
Okay.
And so to answer your question of whether or not God, and again we haven't defined that, reveals ideas to individuals, my answer is yes, because of how I view what we are in a collective intelligence sense. So I absolutely believe it. I believe that logos is fundamental to the nature of reality, and the instantiation for its perfect incarnation in man is encapsulated in the model of Christ. And so, and you could make the case that Elijah as well. But my point is that Christ is the calculus.
My thing is when you reduce it to a single person like Jesus,
Yep.
I don't think it can be a complete instantiation.
No. It's
Pajot says,
well, I want to be clear.
The best story is the life of Christ, and I just think the story of the life of Jesus is one among many stories that are incredibly important.
So, Jacob, I don't doubt that there's not important previous stories. That's not to say anything, but when you
equally important.
When you're see, that's the problem. It's not. It's calculus to algebra, and that's the argument I'm making. Is that while you could make the claim that in the Judeo, we'll say culture before, which Christ came out of, Jesus came out of that, right? Obviously, the ideas he had are emergent from that underlying subculture. There's no question about it. The question is it instantiated or articulated in as precise or as accurate a manner in any story or form before him? And the answer is no. I have not found it. And if you can find specifically where the articulation of the selflessness is encapsulated in the crucifixion story and his reaction to it anywhere else in texts, I will change my mind.
Father, forgive them. They know what they do.
The idea that he would take the idea that as a man, assume he's a man, that he could be so aligned in and of himself and take so much responsibility and be so selfless that in his dying state, in agony after being tortured by an angry mob, that's how he views them. I can't find something that rivals that for a mode of emulation anywhere else.
Okay, I have to say I think the people who talk about typology and Christology and how Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament would have a lot to say about that, because they would say that, and I would say, I mean, so the joke is the New Testament is filled with many new and wonderful things. The problem is those things which are new are not wonderful, and those things which are wonderful are not new.
Are you speaking to the whole New Testament or specifically to Peter's writings? Are the Gospels included in this?
The entire. I believe that Christianity is Judaism viewed through a glass darkly. That
Interesting.
when you're coming out of a pagan environment, you're coming out of complete darkness, right? You need to see the glass darkly, and only after you've accustomed yourself to that are you ready for the fullness of the light, which is actually Judaism.
But a lot of the so that's to your point, though. I actually don't disagree with that. Christianity is an amalgam of paganism and Judaism, built in really the mixing of cultures. But in that lies its power. Like, that's kind of the point. It's a
Well, yes, I mean there is so. I keep on going back to what Maimonides said almost 1,000 years ago, which is that God is using Christianity and Islam to spread Jewish ideas throughout the world, until those ideas have permeated all over the world, in which then we will be ready for the coming of the Messiah, and so and
but
I
that's
wouldn't
an
be able
argument in context of a religion. That's not an objective context that you're making that argument from.
What do you
Not
mean?
that I'm disagreeing with you. I mean, functionally, that's what's happening, right? You are taking a Judeo core and spreading it across the world. I mean, really, you have
Well,
three
the question
choices.
becomes what happens at the end, and I believe at the end, Christianity. And I wouldn't be able to say this if Pajot and Paul Vanderklay didn't say it before I did. I think the purpose of Christianity is, in fact, to die and be resurrected, as what Judaism always wanted it to be, which is the covenant of Noah. That's my.
So it's hard to make an argument against that. The one argument I would say, although you could say that it's encapsulated in it, I guess, is that functionally the new world and the globe was unified under the banner of proselytizing Christianity, right? Running around trying to convert natives, and that action and its cultural impact, while viewed negatively nowadays in the modern sphere, actually has quite positive impacts overall from a global perspective. And our ability to react as a species and to continue to move forward wouldn't be the same without Christianity's development. And Judaism as a
I would actually say
non-proselytizing religion. Well, Islam was fundamental too. I'll give them that. They're also very proselytizing.
And I think that's why we needed Christianity and Islam, because I believe ultimately the ultimate religion can't be a proselytizing one.
Why?
Because proselytizing shows a lack of faith in God.
That's an argument made from within. That's a strong argument from within the context of the religion. That it doesn't. I don't know that that's as strong in an objective sense. Because a non-proselytizing religion would be at a disadvantage from a reproduction standpoint, as far as ideas.
So the analogy I make is trying to improve somebody else's relationship with God is similar to trying to improve your marriage by seducing your wife. Doesn't quite work. Ultimately, your relationship has to be your individual relationship with God. And me teaching you, and that's, I mean, what I would say Jeremiah 31 is saying, right? When the new covenant happens, what does it say will happen? That man shall no longer teach man. It shall no longer be necessary for us to teach one another. I didn't mean to like get you into this whole thing. Yeah.
No, it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure for like that it doesn't jive with my evolutionary view of the world. Is the problem? Is that and we're bridging onto a different philosophy set now. That if you view logos as central to the universe, which is an interesting concept in and of itself, then life's attempts at, we'll say, maximizing its model of the fitness function, the fitness landscape, need to be oriented for maximum self-replication. So a non-proselytizing behavioral pattern just isn't going to be stable over the long term, because
once you have 100% of humanity, you will no longer have proselytizing.
Sure. Yeah. No. If you convert every node, absolutely. Then you're fine. The issue is off. I guess the idea would be that that Judaism as a core offloaded the proselytizing work to subroutines almost.
Well, I didn't do it. God did it.
No. I know, but my point is that it seems, and again, I'm not questioning, if this is true, fine, but it seems as though you're loading on software that may, and again, I'm using very terminological computer-based stuff.
Jargon, yeah, it's fine.
But you're loading software onto nodes, and you're going to have to wipe the node of all the unnecessary code later in order to get it to 100%. Just seems better to install the original good code to begin with, if that's really the goal.
Well,
right?
Okay, so part of the problem is that we do believe, so I don't believe once the Messiah comes, everybody's going to be Jewish. I believe that once the Messiah comes, Jews are going to be the nation of priests, and there are still going to be Gentile nations which are separate and different from Israel. I don't look forward to a future where everyone is part of Israel. And the fact is, even within Israel, Judaism actually does have castes, and we still have castes. Within Orthodox Judaism, we still, the three castes, Kohen, Levi, Israel, is something we continue to have. But okay, we've gone a long way. Define
I like
God.
it. It's good. You want me to define God? Sure. So I would say my definition of God is logos. It's the Greek word for word, right? And I would say that inside of that is a lot of old philosophical notions from the Stoics, the Platonics, etc., that are encapsulated in it. But I would say maximized perception. So, and perception is a funny word. Is that included in the concept of perception is the concept of utility, because perception implies utility. And so maximizing utility for an end would be, the ultimate perception would be ultimate utility, if that makes any sense. So I would say that my view of God is that the universe, it's somewhat along Langen's ideas, is that the universe is a self-contained, self-processing language that's attempting to maximize a generalized utility function.
I am not aware of Langen, and I have not seriously contemplated these ideas before, and I want to cogitate on them a bit. My first reaction would be that it seems like a sort of utilitarian, pragmatic definition of God that is too. So for me, I think ultimately God is love, and in Hebrew, love.
Define love.
Okay, so in Hebrew, the word ahava includes the root hav, which means to give, right? And God gives, right? And we receive. And God's very nature is to be that which gives. Right. And ultimately, I have to go back to the ineffable finite nature, because God is love. Love is not God. Right. And love is, in a sense, we would say loving kindness is a person of God. right? Uh, but and it's not the only person of God, and persons of God are not God himself. This is getting into really deep theology.
No. This is all I've been delving into over the past couple of years. Anyway, this is perfect. So what I would say is I always bristle when people say God is love, not because I don't like the statement in my own mind. It depends on what you define love as. Because I always picture the hippies, right? God is love, man. Out there with this idea that the maternal style of love, where you nurture and care only, is it's this Gaia view of God, right? So I don't assume you're doing that. I don't assume you're saying that.
No,
You're
actually, part of the funny part of that is that chesed, which I'm talking about, is the loving kindness, right? So in Judaism, we have the three pillars. There's the right side, the left side, and the middle. And chesed is actually on the right side, and it's considered masculine.
Huh. That's good. So the masculine form of love, obviously you need both, right? There's two sides to all coins. But the masculine form of love is something a little bit that I can stomach better, being associated with God as the primary thing, where you're giving the thing that you love what it needs to develop, not nurture necessarily all the time. It can be challenge, it can be hardship, it can take on a whole range of things. And develop obviously is a word that implies some sort of end goal. And so what I would say is, yes, God is love, and his loving ways are intended to develop you towards maximized perception or something like that. So I think I would agree with you. It's just I really focus on that being useful to the species as a whole from an individual perspective is the goal. And from a universe perspective, we may not even matter. I don't know. I don't want to make claims.
Okay, so I've guided the conversation so far. What do you want to talk about?
Oh, well, more than anything, I think that during one of the most interesting things that happened to me was when I started the podcast. I had 0 subscribers, something like that. What was interesting is people from places like 4chan and Reddit and all these other communities grabbed what I was putting out, which was really cringeworthy in the early phases, and I was kind of blown away by the level of collaboration that happened after that. And what was interesting is, as I was going through trying to piece together where I knew I wanted to go, which was the pill in the first 6 videos or so, there were a bunch of individuals who anonymously came out of the blue and threw ideas at me that after watching and they're like, oh, I know where you're going with that, and then threw something that I was not going there, but I grabbed that and I'm like, oh, that's really good. And it was this shared journey almost, which was really interesting. What I find most fascinating about human beings is that we all exist as individuals inside of our own minds, and the Jungian breakout of the archetypes, and fundamentally the 4, right? Ego, self, shadow, anima, animus, whichever one that's it applies to you. That's how we perceive the world, but I don't know that an individual human actually exists in nature. And we're something different than that. There's a collective consciousness that I think is riding over the top of all of us as nodes. And thanks.
Artlian, were you the one who? I think you might have been the one who first sent me Coroneus Phocis's thing. I'm not sure. Somebody on Bridges of Meaning linked it, and yeah. So,
yeah, it's interesting. Well, I really like that view, and there's parallels to the concept of the Holy Spirit and these deeper notions, right, that are of a religious flavor. But you can feel these things. What's so interesting is if you start to, we do it without thinking about it. When you go to a concert that's playing really good music and everyone has this sense of shared experience elation and joy at the same time, and it's very spiritual in and of itself. What's interesting is our propensity to be able to have those experiences and almost be part of a collective intelligence without really understanding that that's what's going on. And a lot of what I've been focused on, as far as my own hobby-esque research, is the linking of the idea of the collective unconscious from Jung to other species that are collectivized, like ants, bees, and thinking about how very simple algorithmic operations at an individual level can have this emergent swarm intelligence that comes out of it. And when I look out at humanity, that's what I see. You go about your day to day, almost 85% of your day is routinized actions that are basically reactions to environment based on protocols that we've instantiated in society. And yet you fly in a plane and look out and you see this emergent civilization that's got this collective will that doesn't seem to exist in any individual node. It's like a consciousness that's laid over the top of the nodes. And that concept has really consumed me, and I don't know that I can ever fully understand it, because the idea that you would be able to understand it would be akin to a neuron understanding the whole brain. But I think that we are participating in a collective intelligence. I'm convinced of it. I just don't know how we can describe it or even investigate it. There's these projects like the Global Consciousness Project that's being done, where they do like randomness tests based on different places around the world, and they have that GCP dot, right? Those are all interesting, but I think that philosophically speaking, viewing ourselves as part of a collective network, and Peterson, to his credit, really focuses on that. He said multiple times in lots of lectures that you're a node in a network, and if you take that idea seriously, to answer your original questions, what do we do about all this? Well, you as the node need to stop vibrating erratically. That's step one. Start vibrating in a positive, aligned fashion to increase global perception of the network. That's step one. And then in doing that, you should start to communicate truthfully with nodes around you. And so to your point, with the distributed cognition and putting a barrier around it, it fits perfectly in that idea.
Have you, I don't know if I introduced you to my Spotify attempt at a podcast.
No, I've not seen that, no.
Okay, so Spotify has this thing where you can create a podcast and use their entire music library, right?
Cool.
Yeah. And so the first episode I made, the point of it was the main song I kind of focused around is, are we human or are we dancer, right?
Yeah.
And the way I would put what you're saying is, we need to be dancer, right? As humans, we need to dance with the other nodes.
Yeah, no, and so old fatherly wisdom, right? That you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, is all based on this idea that the world at large responds to you as a node in how you interact with it, right? So if you and your daily interactions are contributing to the vitriol and the radicalization of the network at large, you're not helping, right? So being as truthful in your communication and as calm, because right now I feel like the network is just vibrating rapidly and really at risk of tearing apart, is what I feel. That we all need to subsume our emotions to a different goal, and really start to build truthful portions of the network that communicate calmly, clearly, rationally, and not with agitation. Because a lot of what's going on when everyone's out there marching and screaming, it doesn't help. It doesn't help.
See, so I hear what you're saying, and to the point where I don't want to say I disagree, but I want to say I disagree because I think the problem is actually that there there are nodes putting out discordant, right? Think of it as kind of like the heartbeat, and
Yep.
you have you have a pacemaker there that is like making the wrong pace,
Yeah.
and at some point your body has to reject.
No, absolutely, Jacob. So, but here's the issue, right? And I'm again, my data science background's coming out here, right? So when you train neural networks in deep learning, you have what's called dropout. And so when you optimize the network to solve a particular problem, you can drop connections between nodes. And so what you're describing, if a node becomes worthless, meaning that it only ever communicates the wrong answer, it gets dropped by all adjacent nodes by nature of the optimization function over time, right? So what I would say is that, to your point, there absolutely are bad nodes. The question is, do we have faith that a truthful network operating truthfully will naturally drop those without any oversight of an individual node? And my personal opinion is it will, is that truth wins out, is that if you have a truthful communication segment, bad nodes will naturally be ejected from that just by people isolating them without communication.
This gave me what I hope is an insight. So possibly the problem is the anonymity.
Yes.
The problem is that the nodes are in fact shifting, and people, right? And so people don't know which nodes to
Correct.
drop.
That can be a big problem. If I was trying to optimize a neural network to solve a problem and the nodes kept changing identities and so the weights kept shifting, that would be very, very difficult. That would be impossible to solve. So anonymity is a big problem. I also think that Peterson's pointed this out a couple times, and I think it's exacerbated by the pill. The fact that the terrible feminine is let loose and rampant in mass across social networks is not good. Reputation destruction and cancel culture is a feminine thing for sure. So we definitely don't want to have that be the norm. So tying people's identities to it, so that when you say something outrageous and try and dredge up the past, people can kind of shun you for that. We can get into that idea like everyone has a second chance. Someone's tweet from 20 years ago doesn't really matter, right? So,
or if they apologize, one thing we've completely, we're no longer willing to take apologies from some people.
Yeah, you
and
say, "Hey, I was
people,
wrong," and I retract that. That doesn't mean anything anymore.
Well, and some people, it's like even we. Yeah.
That's look. These are the. I really like this line of conversation. I am not arrogant enough to assume that I have any idea what's actually going on. I have a glimmer of an image in my mind about what I think it is. It could be completely off, but it does give me hope to think it. Though I like thinking it because I feel like it orients me in a positive way inside of my own family, inside of my community, inside of my business. Right? If I think of myself as a vibrating node, and then I want to vibrate in a positive way to allow all the other nodes around me to benefit and grow, it just seems to be the proper form. And I'm using terminology that you could simply say as a religious context. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, right? Like this idea that you should just, put yourself into God's will, and that helping your fellow citizens around you is part of that, right? But I like the mathematical language, I guess.
Do we have to burn the atheists at the stake?
No. So I think you convert them. I'm a former atheist. So it comes back to the idea that I have faith truth will win out, right? I think that atheism doesn't withstand deep intellectual scrutiny. It just can't. It doesn't exist. Wheeler, nobody talks about. I mean, Peterson talks about Wheeler a little bit, but Langen goes deep on Wheeler, and Wheeler really, as the physicist, had some excellent ideas about the self-exciting circuit and this idea that consciousness is fundamental to the nature of reality. And as soon as you think about that, you don't get there without God. There has to be some form of overarching. It just doesn't work. You have to have a prime mover. And it goes back to a really old argument, is that you can't get to where we're at logically without the invention of logic to begin with. Somebody had to define that logos was centric. And that's why I say that God is logos, just because if you're a believer in science, your entire worldview is based off a logical framework. Well, the core, the root word of logic, logos, needs definition. You can't have tautologies without the idea of conscious perception. They don't exist. So I'm going way too far, but
no. I want to subscribe to your newsletter.
I don't produce content anymore, which I just, and I apologize, and I've been telling my audience this.
I will never forgive you. I'm sorry.
I haven't produced a video in almost a year now. And it's not because I don't, I'm not studying things and don't have things to say. I just haven't had any time. Like my personal life has just
five kids. Like, it's so selfish of you to have 5 kids
and a growing business that's just, it just consumes 80 hours a week. So it takes everything I got. But I really want to do a series of talks deeper. The last video I did was on the CTMU, which focused on Langen's conception. I didn't get too deep into the SCSPL, which is the self-configuring, self-processing language, which is kind of we'll say the extrapolation from his presuppositions around tautologies. But again, back to your atheist idea, atheists are the biggest believers in science ever, but they've never wrestled with the philosophical question of why logos. And the fundamental components of perception themselves. And until you do that, your entire worldview is based on a set of assumptions that have no real foundation. So logic in and of itself, as the primary driver of mathematics, requires logos as its center. You have to wrestle with that.
I'm sitting here thinking, okay, this man needs to. So it was Ardlian. It's all your fault, Ardlian. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I need to listen to this man talk to Yosef and Sam Adams because you're just too smart.
I'll probably make a fool out of myself, man.
I don't know how to engage with somebody of your intellect the way they do.
It's not as you're making it out to be more than it is.
No. See, okay, that's just bullshit. Your imposter. I don't know if I want to call it imposter syndrome. I don't know what I want to call it, but no, I mean, I think part of the problem is we have such a deficient hierarchy, right? That we get midwits, and look. I wouldn't say it if I didn't, if I hadn't verified it to myself several times through all kinds of standardized testing. I'm one of the smartest people in the United States. I just am. And it's not like I did anything to become that, right?
Yeah.
But then there's a level of intelligence which is qualitatively, I would say, higher than mine, and I can recognize that. And you and Yosef and Adam and John Vervaeke and they're Adam. I mean Sam Adams.
Yeah.
And like, I would love to live in a world where I can be an insurance agent and just watch videos of you discussing with Sam Adams and Yosef things, as opposed to having to listen to midwits and idiots talk absurdities like that.
I love that. Well, I'm very, very uncomfortable with you putting me on the level of those gentlemen. I'll be, to be frank.
Too
I look.
bad. I'm sorry, but this is hierarchy. I'm too bad.
So well, I know what my IQ is. I mean, not that that's necessarily the best measure of intelligence, but I look. The fundamental thing is it's about time invested. So I've spent a lot of time, and it's all I do is reading things and thinking about these ideas and
But you have a capacity to process that is.
I do, but it's not as high as you'd think. Like it's not, so look, I'm not, I know what I am.
With me.
I know what I am. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody, but what I will say is that I think that anyone who takes the concept of perception seriously, and Wheeler probably did it the best from the hard sciences perspective. And I recommend reading all of his books if anyone has a chance. As a physicist, I love physics books, right? You can't get to where you without perception, there is no tautology. And without a tautology, there is no science, there is no math. So you got to explain perception. And perception requires you to explain consciousness. And until you can, the only explanation is that there is a spark of some other thing that's driving it. There's a prime mover that drives this entire Again, you can't optimize without a goal. So somebody set the goal. Something set the goal. So the fact that this entire universe seems to be optimizing towards something implies a goal.
I'm guessing you can't go to Thunder Bay.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you, I'm like, yeah, they're like, so Yosef is getting his PhD in artificial intelligence.
Oh,
like,
beautiful.
Yeah. So
he gets what I'm talking about. He's got to get what I'm talking about.
I'm sure he does. Like, but like you, so he's got kids and he's trying to finish up his PhD and he's working and getting and everything else. In addition to being an Orthodox Jew, meaning he spends 2 hours a day praying, and he does daf yomi, which is another thing that's beyond me. And it's like, I would love to hear the two of you just talking to each other. And Sam Adams, who again is really like, do you watch his channel?
I do, yeah. I've watched quite a bit of Sam. I like all these guys. The intellectual dark web back in the heyday in 2015ish was, I was streaming it all. So I appreciate all of them. I don't know that I'm on their level, but I'm more than willing to talk to anyone that wants to talk. And I have burning questions for Sam Adams specifically. That I'd love, and same with Dawkins. I'd love to talk to Dawkins, although I'm nobody, man.
For Sam?
Oh, my questions for Sam are around the idea of self-simulation and logos and tautologies and perception, and they're the line of thinking there around Wheeler, and that he's not really addressed that because Peterson tried. So it was funny because in the Peterson Sam debates that happened.
Hold
Peterson,
on. Oh, you're thinking Sam Harris, not Sam.
I'm sorry.
Sam Adams is one of our local people.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking Sam Harris the whole time.
You are thinking of Sam Harris. No, Sam Adams. And my recommendation.
I'm not familiar with Sam Adams.
So he had several discussions with Vervaeke.
Okay.
And Vervaeke on his channel. It's a small channel. No, but I'm talking just people from our small little corner.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And at the end of his first discussion with John Vervaeke is like, "Wow, I really felt challenged." And it's like, well, Sam is he's actually a data scientist and like theology nerd, and he was engaging with Vervaeke on like cog sci stuff, and Vervaeke felt challenged by him, and it's like, Oh wow! So when you said you had questions for Sam, I just assumed you had watched at least
No,
his
I'm
discussion
sorry.
with
I
thing.
was I was confusing him with Sam Harris when you were talking. I've watched a lot of those guys. I've not watched any Sam Adam. I'll have to go look him
His
up.
channel is called Transfigured,
Transfigured. Okay.
and honestly, I mean, I think you might find he's doing he's a Unitarian. Um, he's our resident Unitarian slash expert on the Trinity
Yeah.
because he's been excommunicated several times from churches for denying the Trinity, and he's and he's doing this thing on the church fathers, which you might find interesting, you might not, but his discussions with Vervaeke, just because he has a capacity to engage with the thoughts of Vervaeke that like I don't. um, that that's why I want you. That's why I want you talking to Sam, and like Sam's on my Discord server,
No.
and he does engage with my Discord server when he
Okay.
can. But again, he's got a job and kids, and
I know the feeling. I
yeah.
know.
So the three of you, Yosef, Sam, and you on my Discord server, it's like. Uh, I wish what I could do is like give you guys more time. Like I could take some of my time and just like hand it over. you know?
Yeah. No, I could use it. I look. I'm more than willing to talk with anyone as long as I can find my schedule. And these are the ideas I actually like to talk about. Like right now, I'm reading the Summa Theologica by Aquinas. Right, that's what I'm going through right now, and with the intent of just focusing on this conception of the word and its relation to tautologies and reality. And I mean, look, the books of the Genesis specifically, and then John. Those two things combined are just out of this
have
world.
you looked into Plotinus?
He's on my list. I'm getting there. I'm getting.
I would put him above the Summa Theologica,
Really?
because Plotinus. So through Augustine, Plotinus is so. I mean, again, my idea is the Kabbalistic lab leak.
Sure.
I believe Plotinus is far closer to the actual leak.
Sure. Look, it's quite. What I'm really searching for is more understanding about the meta reality in which tautologies exist, and it's a really hard concept to explain, but it's been in religious, tradition going back for forever. This idea of ordering chaos, and the idea, and that the way you do that is through the word, and that you, by defining a subsection of chaos, you order it. Like from a tautological perspective, this is rain. Everything else is not rain. Right? This is a crow. Everything else is not crow. So as soon as you create a word, you've actually defined the entirety of reality, because everything that's not that word, the opposite of that word, is everything else that can be. So it's a deeper concept than, again, Langen went into it quite in depth in the CTMU, but it's such a fundamental concept. I think that the religious, Kant kind of went into it a little bit as well. But the religious wisdoms, I don't know they've been fully gleaned, and my intent is to go back into all of them in the traditions and try and glean some more. That's what I'm trying to do. Glean a couple nuggets, because a lot of the philosophers got it, but I don't know that it's not. We don't understand it fully.
I'm thinking I need to introduce you to Hasidic philosophy.
Yeah, I'm more than willing. I love the wordplay, right? Ish and Isha and Adam. Like it triggers that part of my brain that's like, he didn't exist before she. They came into being at the same time, because you can't have one without the opposite, right? And in order for something to be instantiated in the universe, its opposite, or things that are not it, must exist. So
Okay, so I'm going to send you a link to what's called The Gates of Unity and Faith by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who lived almost 300 years ago. And it's
okay.
not very long. You should be able to read it in one sitting. And I wonder what you're going to think about that.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't want to take up your time just because it's like I want this guy to talk to Yosef and Sam about this stuff. But I would love to sit here and listen to you. So
Oh.
as what do you have to say for yourself?
What do I have to say for myself?
Yes, Brent.
Oh, geez. I don't know. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy life, I would say. And I think that one of the things that I would say that I struggle with, I'll be a little more personal, I think, is all of these ideas and conceptions tilt toward nihilism in some respects, right? Especially when you get overly objective. And that's something that especially when I was younger, the nihilistic viewpoint it's very alluring. And I battle it off. And one of the things that I will note is that to any of the listeners out there that struggle with this, because I do feel like there's a lot of nihilism in the world right now. People just kind of think things don't matter, and so why care? And I'm seeing it in my own business with some of my employees where they create their own calamities in their lives for no reason. And so one of the things that I would say is that the most effective way that I found to battle that nihilistic viewpoint, where you get, a little bit depressive and self-loathing and kind of a little hatred for society at large, is my children. And without them, I probably wouldn't still be in this world, I'll be frank, because it's very uncomfortable to exist in modern society. And for me, and I'm assuming for a lot of other people, there's a discomfort in all of the constant barrage of, like the article that you showed, right? There's just this nonstop false perception being pounded into everybody all the time. And the way I buttress my own life against that is grounded in my wife and children. And without that, I wouldn't continue to be, because I probably couldn't have taken it. So it gives you meaning that allows, and that's Peterson's primary notion, is that meaning's the antidote to all of this. And I agree with it fundamentally.
So what does Mrs. Ficus think about all this stuff?
So last name's Jackson. Yeah. So let me get. So my wife and I have a very traditional marriage, and it didn't start that way. So as you can see, I got some flags up there, although that's not mine. Oh wait, there, up there we go. That's from my great uncle. I've had quite the military family. He died in World War II. And my family served, other than my father's generation. My brother and I both served. So we started out as a military family. I graduated with my physics degree, met her in college. We both had to work. I was working as a bar job at a nightclub in Scottsdale, Arizona. Slinging drinks and filling up ice and all that stuff, which may have contributed to my understanding of human mating behavior, to be honest with you, because watching night after night, like the courting rituals of humanity is rough. But anyway, we had our first kid very young. I was 22, she was 25. And, I joined the military because I graduated in 2008, couldn't find a job. And so we were both working throughout that, but the military kind of stopped her from being able to work because we moved around a lot, and we spent 2 years in Korea. One of my daughters was born there. Lots of sounds like I got some kids crying. Lots of moving. So she took on a housewife role. What's interesting about that is that we had 3 children at the time, and I had been just deployed and came back from Afghanistan. When I got back, she was not very happy with the setup that we had, and I vividly remember her. She's like, I'm going back to work. I'm going to hire a babysitter, and I'm going back to work, because in her mind, she wasn't contributing to us because financially and just for her own, having 3 kids under 5 or 6 at the time, it's rough, right? There's a lot of chaos in the household. But she got a job at Applebee's serving again. It's just something to just basically make a little extra money. A week into that, she just told me, she's like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is the stupidest thing ever. Called up and quit over the phone, and has never gone back since. She did do some entrepreneurial things, but we finally came to a place where I was making enough money didn't matter anymore, number one. And number two, the amount of children that we have necessitated a lot of home building, which is work that's not valued by our society anymore. And it's funny because in our marriage, as we fell into the most traditional roles possible from an old sense, our marriage improved dramatically. Right. And a lot of that's my own personal growth, her personal growth. But we have basically like the most traditional marriage that you could have as far as now. We didn't start that way. But, she doesn't work. And if she does make extra money, it's incidental to her goals of raising children properly. It's not the fundamental goal. So she's happy. I mean, I will say that she and the kids probably do some eye rolling at the dinner table as I spurg out or rant on some of these topics, which I've toned down on. But, we have the typical life. I have a 14-year-old daughter, typical teenage problems, and I got a 12-year-old daughter, also typical early teenage problems, and an 11-year-old who's, they're all girls, so it's a very female household. I grew up with a brother, so this is a brand new world for me. It's been interesting to watch. It's been fun.
Oh, that's another person I should, Andrea with the bangs, because so she came from a very female household, and she and her husband have 3 sons, and she's another person in this little corner of the internet who is a very interesting person because she asks really good questions. She says she asks dumb questions, but no, she just asks really good questions.
Yeah.
And like that simplify things, that make things, and part of the getting to know her has been realizing how incredibly female she is. To the and I think for her it's going from a very female household to living with her husband and 3 sons has really changed her view on things a lot. So she's another interesting person. I would that
well, I was going to say, so it's funny because you mentioned that all these conversations that we're having are always from the masculine perspective. And my wife, actually, she's generally not very confident about public speaking or anything. But she just gave a talk in church that I was listening to. And I was funny because I was beaming with pride because she nailed it, right? I do a lot of presentations, and I'm pretty good at speaking in front of people like ad hoc. And she did better than I could have done, and she never does it. And what I was thinking about doing actually is getting her on, because her perspective on how to build a home and like how to really instantiate the feminine archetypes like correctly, I think it's fascinating. She does a really good job at it. We've been it's been a fun journey in life with her, I have to say. Because she is the exact opposite of me in almost every way. And somehow it works. It complements to a whole. So,
did you have a chance? I don't know how much of my stuff you've bothered with, but my most recent discussion was with actually a couple, and Catherine and her husband Eamon, and one of the best conversations I've ever had.
Really?
And deliberately, I asked them on as a couple
Hmm.
because of the Ish Isha Adam thing, right? It's for me personally in my own life, it's been a very hard thing that Orthodox Judaism says if you're not married, you're not a human being. I mean, it actually like that's in the
Yep.
code of Jewish law, right?
I couldn't agree more.
And as somebody who was not married and that was incredibly difficult, and somebody who's still not married and it's still incredibly difficult,
Sorry to hear that, man.
I mean, it happens. But the fact that I get even more offended at the idea that we're going to redefine things so that because my life is as it is, that it's now ideal. And it's like
Yeah.
you're just completely missing the point.
Well, I don't envy anyone in the dating market right now. I mean, honestly, and my wife and I's path to this point is definitely not optimized for how you would want to try to do it. We made it work, and it ended up being really, really positive. But I have friends who are my age, and again, I'm 37 now. I had to think about that for a second. I'm 37 now, so I some of my friends who are still single and trying to date, through apps and whatnot. I hear the stories specifically from the male side, and it is not a pleasant experience. I don't envy that, and I don't have good advice to that either. Except I do see upstanding females in church who are single, and the type of fish you catch indicates the pond that you're fishing in, to some extent. So that would be my only, yeah, and I'm speaking specifically to the people who are primarily using like Tinder as an app to try to meet somebody. That's not a good pond. It doesn't work well. So
Yeah. I've started. I went to a couple of Mormon services, and I went to a Seventh Day Adventist one, and wow, the Seventh Day Adventist one was just like I was. I walked out of there. I was like, wow.
yeah,
It was something else. Yeah, those black churches, they know how to do church.
yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
it's, the community that comes with that, right? So we've been going to church for a while now, and I'll keep it non-denominational. I'm not trying to proselytize a specific religion. We're generally Christian, right? But you find the same thing in most devout subsects of Christianity as you do in devout subsects of Judaism, as you do in devout subsects of Islam, right? There's very specific gender roles, and people are playing those parts, and it tends to work. And I would just say that, in spite of your views on the proper one of those set of things to be instantiated in, the members of those communities agree on the main thrust of everything that you would want to agree on.
yeah,
So, you can hash out which side of the fence you want to land on later. The point is to pair up. So, like that would be my thing.
yeah. No, that's actually one of the things. Part of why I've been pushing this concept of post-Platonic, post-nominalist Neoplatonism, because I think, I mean, really, Neoplatonism does from what people I trust who have actually studied religion big enough. What they say is that Neoplatonism like describes Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and probably Buddhism, and maybe some others.
Okay.
And
Buddha. How
it's
does it do Buddhism? I'd be interested in that one.
well, apparently Buddhism, especially how it's developing with its contact in the West,
Okay.
has
Yep.
really caught fire. Like the Buddhism that's kind of like become
Yep.
standard Western Buddhism
The
is
Alan
very
Watts
Neoplatonic.
version, right? Like the Alan
Yeah,
Watts westernization. Yeah, I'm with you.
I
I'm with you
guess.
100%. Sure.
I don't know much about it. Do you listen to Vervaeke, or are you much of a fan of him?
I've listened to a couple episodes, probably not as much as I should. I would say that my my time for listening when I was really deep in the podcast world and listening to a bunch of stuff was really 2015, 2016 through maybe 2019, and then my life started to get busy, and I haven't listened to much since then. So I try, but it's
I didn't finish Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's 50 hours, partially because so much of it was review for me, being so involved in this corner of the internet. But recently, Vervaeke was a visiting scholar, I believe at Cambridge. It was either Oxford or Cambridge, or one of those UK, and it's on his channel. And it was a phenomenal. It was definitely worth. In fact, why don't I just?
I will share with you one. Let's see if I can find it here. Here you go. So a channel by the name of Mathema. Have you heard of him?
No.
He has a playlist titled Theology that where he does a classical defense of theology. I found it to be utterly fascinating. So that would be one of the things, because it kind of aligns with some of the stuff that you've talked about. Let's see here. Let me click on that link. The meaning of, or the Meaning Crisis series, that it was Vervaeke that did that, correct?
Yeah, Vervaeke did the meaning Crisis one.
Yeah, it's I need to get through all of that. I have not yet. I'm familiar with the fundamental ideas, because it kind of, like you said, it exists in that same pool of concepts that's been going around. But I haven't spent enough time on either Pajot's channel or Vervaeke or Peterson's, for that matter, or any of these other guys.
Well, who has? I mean, even I don't have the time, and I'm not married, and like this is my off season at work, and I have no kids.
Right.
Even I don't have the time, and I listen at 1.5 speed to listen to all the content that we put out, and this is part of why I think it is necessary to have a bit more interconnected. We're putting out a lot of content, but so what if I'm putting out so much content if we're not actually talking? Okay, I am going to put this playlist into the chat for anybody who's interested.
Yeah, he's got a good channel, and I found him by mathematical videos, right? But he does this classical defense of theology. It's a good series. It's a really good series. So focused on Aquinas, Summa Theologica. But Jacob, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. We were like 2 hours now, so I don't want to.
It is, yeah. Thank you so much. Again, I want to hear you talk to Yosef and Sam. I will message both of them and send them this conversation.
Sure.
And you're always welcome. If there's anything you want to say, you're always welcome. But yeah, it's. I just wish there was a time. If you can think, I mean, there was a way. If you can think of a way of allowing other people to just hand you time in some way, it's worth it for us who want to see you create more content to actually empower you however we can.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Unfortunately, again, it's not something that I can offload right now. Maybe in the next year or two, I might free up a little bit, and then my intent is to come back. If I can ever get to a place where I don't have to work anymore, then all I would do is create content and just read stuff and explore these ideas.
I would contribute to your Patreon.
No, so that, one more note I will say one more. So it's just my personal thing. Like I I have a Patreon account, but it's not for my own income. It just goes into, I pay ad dollars out to move the videos around. I do not want to financially benefit at all from anything that I produce online, and I never will monetize because I want it to stay intellectually pure. And if I need dollars from it, then it can't be me. So that's my view.
Okay, okay. I'll consider it. Okay, thank you. I will let you go.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Okay, I am going to stick around for a little while in case there are people who want to discuss that conversation. Please put comments or questions in the thing, or if you know me, you can DM me, and I will let you come on and we can have a discussion. But otherwise, I'm going to go get a drink and I'm going to check my emails, and I'm actually going to try to maybe be a tiny bit productive in this world. I would love to get married. It's complicated, Roman. Thank you, Roman. Have you really, John? Okay. I am well, thank you. Amen. Grace and peace to you as well. Okay, people, I will see you later.